Hello and welcome to RelTalks. This is our second episode in our second installment season, of RelTalks. With us today is Becky Belinsky. Becky is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice in Santa Monica, California. She received her master's degree from Adler University in Chicago and is currently pursuing her PhD in couple and family therapy at Antioch University. Becky's clinical practice specializes in eating disorders, anxiety, and relationships. And she is also a certified intuitive eating counselor. Did I say that right? Intuitive? Okay, just making sure. Her research focuses on the intersection of weight stigma, relationships, and eating disorders. In her free time, Becky enjoys cooking for her family and friends and trying new recipes from her cookbook collection, which according to her is taking up her entire kitchen at this point. And she also loves spending time with her rescue dog named Bear. So Becky, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you for a second. For those of you who are in attendance, if you have any questions that come up at any point during the presentation, go ahead and you'll find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You just click on chat and type that in. At the very end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A with Becky and you'll be able to ask her any questions that you have. But without further ado, Becky, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to turn my camera off. You can share screen and do your thing.
Thank you so much, Eric. Okay. So thank you everyone for being here and joining me today. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment for us all to check in with ourselves. A lot of the things that we'll be talking about today could be emotional or triggering. So let's take a moment to settle in and take a deep breath together. If you feel overwhelmed or notice yourself having a strong emotional reaction at any point during the presentation, I encourage you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do, and to stick with me through the end, where we'll have some time to reflect, bring everything together, and also answer any questions. So I want to start with a quick note about language. The way we talk about body size matters. So during this talk, I will stay away from many of the words we typically use to talk about weight, such as words like overweight and obese, because these are pathologizing, stigmatizing, and dehumanizing words. Instead, I'm going to be using words like larger bodied, plus size, or even the word fat. I use fat as a reclaimed word. It challenges the idea that being fat is a bad thing, and instead uses fat as a neutral descriptor, just like short or tall. So we'll start with the definition. What is weight stigma? Weight stigma is discrimination and oppression based on body size, or negative biases and beliefs about people in larger bodies. Fat phobia is another related term that I'll use later on, which is fear of fat and also oppression based on body size. So how do people experience weight stigma? One way that weight stigma is experienced is internalized. These are the beliefs and messages that we say to ourselves. Another way is interpersonal. These are comments from other people. Those can be explicit or direct, like body shaming, but it also includes someone talking about being unhappy in their own body, saying they're going on a diet, or that they need to lose weight, and things like that. It can also be structural. This includes things like the size of airplane seats or waiting room chairs, blood pressure cuffs not being big enough to fit all bodies, or not being able to find clothes that fit in a store. And it can also be systemic. This includes things like the idea of an obesity epidemic, different media that we see with messages about weight and shape, and also things like people in larger bodies being denied healthcare. While all of these are important, today we're going to focus on mostly the internalized and interpersonal aspect. In a study, 1/3 of experienced weight stigma came from family, and participants described weight stigma from parents as the most impactful or harmful. So while there is definitely work to be done to change the structural and systemic issues, we can all learn and unpack our own beliefs about weight and bodies to have better relationships with ourselves and others, and to not cause harm to our loved ones. So weight stigma is the common research term, but what we're really talking about are any negative messages or beliefs that we have about weight, body size, and shape. So I use this image because we all know this question: do these pants make me look fat? We all absorb these messages about weight and bodies just because of the culture that we live in. It's in the air that we breathe. Many of these messages are so ingrained, we don't even realize that we believe them or that they might be harming ourselves or our loved ones. So I want to take a quick moment to have us reflect on the messages that we might have absorbed from the world so that we can begin to become more aware, and then we can start to challenge them. So just take a quick moment to think about or write down any words, beliefs, or thoughts that come up for you when you think about weight and people who are in larger bodies. What are your fears around gaining weight? So now let's explore some of these messages that you might have come up with. Magazines give us messages about weight and bodies all the time. And just by looking at a couple of these, you can see that the message is very clear. Being thinner is better, and weight loss is really important and something that you should care about and focus on. All of the focus on different types of diets also reinforces this message that diet is important and that we can and should control our weight. So I've put out just some of the popular diets today or in the recent past. And when looking at these diets, it can be confusing. Diets often say conflicting things. For example, vegan and paleo are pretty much the opposite. And we've seen the trend shift from low fat diets to the current fad of low carb. So this confusion might start to give us a clue that maybe diets aren't the answer. But this is something we'll come back to later on. We also see lots of examples of messages about weight and bodies in media. So there are movies or TV shows like Friends, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Love Actually, and even kids shows like Peppa Pig that are fat shaming. In all of them, the main joke is that the person is fat and that is somehow inherently funny. Or there are movies like Shallow Hal, which in the movie, the man only falls in love with a woman because he's been hypnotized to see her as thin. So what kind of message does that send? And then there are also shows or movies like This Is Us, where they may not be explicitly fat shaming, but Chrissy Metz's whole character revolves around weight or her weight loss journey, which tells us that her weight is the most important thing about her, which is still a harmful message. So why does this matter? Well, first, weight stigma really negatively impacts our mental health. Research has shown that it causes an increase in anxiety and depression, a decrease in self-esteem, increase in body image issues, an increase in disordered eating or eating disorders, an overemphasis on health, which could include things like compulsive exercise or an obsession with eating healthy or clean, which ironically ends up harming our health, and relationship distress. And weight stigma itself can cause relationship distress, but also all of the above negatively impact our relationships. The weight stigma also really negatively impacts our physical health. Stigma is experienced as stress, which leads to a variety of negative health outcomes, similar to what we've seen in other marginalized or oppressed groups. It also causes delayed medical care or worse medical care, and can also sometimes result in being denied medical care completely, as there are BMI limits on certain procedures and treatments. Also really important is that weight stigma is a social justice issue. Weight stigma affects everybody, but it disproportionately affects people in larger bodies and people with other marginalized identities, such as Black people, people of color, and trans and non-binary folks. Weight stigma is also deeply rooted in racism. Sociologist Sabrina Strings wrote a book that explores the racist origins of fat phobia. To break it down really simply, in the 19th century, fatness became associated with Blackness and became connected to negative traits such as laziness, sensuousness, and indulgence, and whiteness became associated with thinness and Protestant ideas such as restraint, hard work, and self-discipline. This was intentional and was used as a way to separate and further justify the supremacy of white people and the mistreatment of Black people. So let's explore some myths about weight so that we can become aware of them and start to challenge them. So one really common myth is that weight impacts our health and fat people are unhealthy. A lot of times when people talk about weight stigma, many people can get on board with the idea that it's harmful. But what usually trips people up is the question, what about health? There is so much information out there about how weight impacts our health, and doctors say this too. This is a really hard one to shift, but the truth is the connection between weight and health is so much more complex than we typically think. The research actually shows that health is mostly impacted by genetics and social determinants. These are things like healthcare access and quality, education access and quality, social and community connectedness, the quality of our relationships, economic stability, neighborhood and built environment, like safe places to walk and play. Most of these factors are out of our control. And of the things that impact health that are within our personal responsibility, diet and exercise are even just a small portion of that. Research has shown that health can be improved by engaging in health-promoting behaviors, things like getting enough sleep, reducing stress, limiting smoking and alcohol, increasing exercise, eating more fruits and veggies. All of these can improve health regardless of whether or not these behaviors result in weight loss. And in the research that weight is connected to health, the most important thing to remember is that these studies have shown that there is indeed a connection between weight and health, but there isn't a definitive answer about what that connection is or proof that the weight itself causes poor health outcomes. Recent research shows that experiencing weight stigma causes negative health outcomes, and people in larger bodies also have worse medical care and delayed medical care, which could explain this connection. Weight cycling or yo-yo dieting, losing and gaining weight over and over again, also contributes to poor physical health, such as heart disease, mortality, and some forms of cancer. All of these are more likely explanations for this connection instead of the actual weight itself. Now, another really common myth is that weight is about discipline and willpower, and people are fat because they lack these qualities. So the truth is, we actually don't have any way to sustainably lose weight and keep it off. The research shows that diets fail. 98% of people who lose weight intentionally gain back the full amount, and 2/3 gain back more than they lost within 2 to 5 years. Research that shows successful weight loss is actually pretty bad research. It consistently has small sample sizes and just ignores people who dropped out of the study for whom the diets didn't work, and it only looks 6 months to 1 year post-weight loss. This is a problem because it doesn't capture the majority of people who will gain it back within those 2 to 5 years. This is because our body is not meant to lose weight. It's not really about willpower. We all have a set weight point that our body is happiest at, and our body will do whatever it can to make sure we stay in that range. Research also shows that across the body size spectrum, people's exercise and eating habits are pretty much the same, meaning the idea that people who are fat eat more and move less is just not true. Body size diversity is as prevalent and normal as height and shoe size diversity. So another myth is that weight can be controlled by diet and exercise. So similar to what we just talked about, we actually can't change our body size very much in a sustainable way. And the factors that contribute to body size are really complex. Genetics are the biggest factor, and it also includes many other things that are out of our control, like economic status, environment, age, gender, etc. And finally, another really common myth is that being thin is attractive, and people can't feel good about themselves if they're fat. While we do live in a society that idolizes thinness and elevates certain body types over others, this is not as set in stone as many of us believe. Who we are attracted to is primarily influenced by society and other political and social factors, and there is no evidence that shows that people inherently prefer certain types of bodies over others. One example often cited is that if we look at different cultures or back at art from history, such as from the Renaissance, the ideal woman was in a much larger body than we would consider attractive now. Even in many of our own lifetimes, we have seen the ideal change from very thin women like Twiggy to the aesthetic of people like the Kardashians. While these are all still a pretty narrow view of what is considered attractive, the point is that these things can change and they really aren't fixed. And the great news is that if we've learned these beliefs, this also means that we can unlearn them. So, what can we do? How can we unlearn these beliefs to improve our relationships with our own bodies and create a better world for others? First, we can start by changing the way we think and talk about weight, health, and personal responsibility. So congratulations, you've already started to do that just by being here. We can also educate ourselves and others. You can talk to your friends and family about the myths and truths about weight. We can reduce weight talk, either about yourself or others. This includes things like saying you need to diet or going on a diet, or commenting on other people's bodies, even if they aren't present, and even well-meaning comments like praising someone's weight loss, as this still reinforces these negative messages. A great rule of thumb that I love is to not comment on someone's body unless it takes less than 10 seconds to change, like you have food in your teeth or there's a spider on your head. A great framework for learning more is the idea of health at every size. Health at every size is an approach that is counter to the weight-centric world we live in today and promotes the ideas that we've just talked about, ideas like weight inclusivity and weight neutrality, and promotes the idea that people can pursue health at any size. It's a great resource if you want to explore this anymore. We can also examine our relationship with food and movement. Our relationship with food and movement is usually very connected to our relationship with our bodies. So we can move away from food and movement being ways to control body size and instead to what feels good. So language matters. We can move away from black and white thinking, such as labeling food as good or bad, clean or dirty, saying things like guilt-free, cheat days, needing to earn your food. A quote that I love is that food is morally neutral. Food is only bad if it's rotten and it's going to make you sick. We can also practice intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is a model created by two dietitians for having a healthy relationship with food and focuses on trusting your internal sense of what you need and what feels good, instead of relying on diets or trying to change your body. And research has also shown that intuitive eating and weight-neutral healthcare actually has better health outcomes than any diet or weight-centric care. So these practices really aren't about ignoring health at all. The irony is that weight-centric healthcare and dieting actually harm our health instead of helping it. So intuitive eating is a great way to support both our mental and physical health. We can also practice joyful movement. This is finding movement that's fun and feels good and isn't about punishing, compensating, or trying to change your body. Another thing we can do is expand our media. So research shows that expanding the diversity of people we're exposed to in media can change our implicit biases. This is true for all biases, such as racism, homophobia, sexism, and it applies to weight bias as well. So one example might be expanding your Instagram feed to see more diverse body sizes. It also might mean consuming different TV and movies. Here's just a handful of really great shows that all portray diverse body sizes as well as other marginalized identities in neutral or positive ways. Here's some other media and resources. There's Intuitive Eating, which I just talked about. There's the book Body Respect by Lindo Bacon, which is a really wonderful introduction to the ideas of health at every size. I also already mentioned Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. And then there's some great books about bodies, weight, and fat liberation. like You Have the Right to Remain Fat by Virgie Tovar, The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, and What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. Or if you like podcasts, I highly recommend Food Psych by Christy Harrison, which talks all things health at every size and intuitive eating. We can also practice self-compassion and self-acceptance. So we can shift the way we relate to our own bodies and the bodies of others. We can practice self-compassion instead of self-criticism. So if you notice yourself having a mean thought about your body or someone else's, you can change that. You can also set boundaries. If you're working on accepting your body as it is and others are saying things that are harmful, you can set boundaries to protect yourself from this. You can also acknowledge that you are so much more than your body, and the way that you look is the least interesting thing about you. And you can also appreciate your body for what it can do for you instead of how it looks. It keeps you alive. It lets you feel joy. Play with your children, hug your family, feel the sun on your skin on a warm day, or enjoy a delicious meal with friends. So here are a couple of the main points that I hope you take away from today. Diets don't work. Weight and health are not as connected as we think. Weight stigma and negative messages and beliefs about bodies harm our mental and physical health, and that we can change the way we relate to food, movement, bodies, and ourselves. So one last thought that I want to leave you with today. Our relationship with ourselves is the longest relationship we'll have, and it directly impacts how we relate to others and the world. I hope this talk has given you some food for thought and can help you in creating a more peaceful relationship with yourself and with others. Here are the references that my presentation used today. And lastly, here's my contact information. I love talking about these issues, so if you have any questions or just want to chat more, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. I also enjoy that you ended with a comment about giving us food for thought. I thought that was a well-timed pun, and you just kept right on going through it. I appreciate that as well. So now is our time for a little Q&A. If you have any questions, anything that kind of came up during Becky's presentation that made you think, or things that you want to kind of relate to her, just go ahead and go find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Click on that, type it in, and I will read it out to her. While we're waiting for questions to roll in, I had a question for you. So I was thinking about, things we might do to kind of like, really, feel good about ourselves and the way we look and things like that. Maybe it's, wearing certain things or other things. And all these things are so tied to society and things like that. Ideals of what's person's supposed to look like. How does a person kind of balance that, internal drive to kind of like wanting to look good and feel good about themselves, and maybe what that looks like, and then disentangle that from like these cultural expectations and these difficult kind of like messages that we might get, like weight stigma?
Such a good question, and something that comes up all the time also in my clinical work. And it really is nuanced. What I encourage everyone to sort of think about this and figure it out for themselves. But a measure that I like to use to kind of figure this out is both questioning, like, where are these ideas coming from, right? Are these things I actually believe in, and do they align with my values? And also, how much are they harming me or hurting me? So for the example of like diets, those end up harming us. And so for me, that's a line of something that wouldn't be helpful or good to engage in. But for someone, they might decide that, putting on mascara, that has a very small downside. And so that feels right for them. And another thing that I like to think about is, how do you feel if you don't do that thing? So if it becomes really connected to your self-esteem or self-worth, so if you don't wear makeup or if you don't straighten your hair, can you not go out in public? Do you feel terrible about yourself? If those things are really connected, then that's usually something I would encourage people to look at.
Thank you. So we do have a question in here from Nancy. So she says, I hear diet comments and body comments from women about themselves all the time. What can I say to them when I hear these comments?
Also, such a good question and a tricky one because, like I said, this is the world we live in and we do hear them all the time. And I also like to talk to people about having a variety of options for how to respond and choosing what feels best to you in that moment. So sometimes we don't have the emotional energy to discuss this, and it's really best to just ignore the comment or walk away if they won't stop talking about it. But sometimes it can be helpful to just say a small thing like setting a boundary like, hey, I'm trying to stop talking negatively about my body, and so if you could not do that in front of me, that would be great. Or we can make little comments like, whenever I was in grad school and I had a lot of friends talking about food and calling it good and bad. And so I would always just say food is morally neutral. And they would sort of laugh and make fun of me. But I think I got the message across and I got them to stop talking about it.
Very good. Here we go. Paige has a question. What are your suggestions for finding weight neutral medical care?
Such a tricky one. The good news is it is out there, and the ideas of health at every size are growing and expanding, but it's definitely not the norm. So, Health at Every Size does have a website that has resources on it, and some people, there's like a listing of people who are weight neutral and ascribe to those ideas. I would say probably the best is to find if you know anyone in your community, or I'm happy to be a resource who does understand these, they might be connected to more of those people. There's lots of Facebook groups too with these ideas where people are always looking for those resources.
So along those lines, the question from Lizzie, how can we help physicians learn to provide more weight neutral medical care?
I love that question, Lizzie. That's something that's super hard, but something I'm really passionate about because I find physicians, especially, they just have so much weight stigma in their training. It's really hard to find people who really get it. And so I think if you know any physicians in your life, or if you're in that world, starting to try to spread these ideas, and there is a lot of research out there. So I find that sometimes physicians are more receptive to that because they are so research and science focused. So finding that research, trying to share it. And I also think that it can be really helpful to hear from people who have experienced weight stigma, especially from medical providers, because sometimes that can help people connect with the real harm that it's doing and the pain that these people are in. And so there are some really amazing fat activists out there who write blogs or books or share their testimonials of the stigma they've experienced.
Excellent. All right. Give another minute or so to see if anyone's got questions. This is your last chance for questions. Type quickly, I guess. Amina says, thanks, Becky. Karen says, love this presentation. Thank you. Karen says, thanks. Lots of people coming in here. Also, thanks from me as well. Really helpful information. I'm glad that you shared all that with us today. I believe there is, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, there's going to be a feedback form that'll be sent to those of you who are in attendance. So if you guys get that in the next couple of days, that would be great. If you would fill that out. We have another presentation next Thursday at 6:30. I hope to see you all there as well. I guess that's all I got. So Becky, thank you so much for your presentation. And I think we all learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all.